It is not in vain, sir, to extenuate the matter. Gentlemen may cry, peace, peace, but there is no peace. The war has actually begun. The next gale that sweeps from the north will bring to our ears the clash of resounding arms. Our brethren are already in the field. Why stand we here idle? What is it that gentlemen wish? What would they have? Is life so dear, or peace so sweet, as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God! I know not what course others may take, but for me, give me liberty or give me death. These are the words of Patrick Henry of the House of Burgesses, Richmond, Virginia, 1775. You will notice 1 year before 1776, right? The Proclamation of Independence or whatever it was. Now, the reason I want to bring this up is I actually did a video a long time ago about the Trivium. And when I listen to it again, it's could be fine-tuned a little bit. So this is a piece of a very rhetorical speech that was given at the onset of the American War of Independence, where the House of Burgesses, or the Virginia legislation, House of the Legislators, whatever it was called, House of Burgesses. Patrick Henry had the floor to give a speech in favor of committing Virginian troops to the war effort against the British. Now, you see, for about 2,500 years, the Trivium was taught. The art of oratory was seen as extremely important for free men to be able to express themselves. And in the Trivium, there is grammar, logic, and rhetoric. I'm going to talk about those few and to see how it relates to these sorts of speeches. Well, grammar, of course, is just simply the system of structure within languages. Okay, so you have words, right? But it's how those words are allocated and how they're arranged that makes sense. I mean, we hear people who come from another country who talk, or another language, shall we say, and talk English. We can hear them make syntax errors, grammatical errors of the like, in terms of how they position the noun and the verb and whatnot. And it's understandable when we understand a little bit about their languages, because sometimes the things can be completely reversed. What is correct in French might be this way, and in English it might be this way in terms of the verb and noun arrangement, just as an example. Logic, of course, is a way of presenting something in a sequence that makes logical sense, right? It's the reasoning according to strict principles. If somebody was to say to us that, 2 + 2 is equal to 7, we would say that that's not logical. It's illogical. It doesn't follow. There's no, how did you get there? Like, what's the leap? What was missing, right? And we also see a lot of times, we see what we call logical fallacies, where there's an appeal to something to substitute something missing in it. And when this happens, if it's consciously done, then this can be, forms of sophistry. And sophistry is false conclusions dressed up as correct conclusions. A good example of this might be how the sellers of the proprietors of all kinds of apocalyptic climate pronouncements will say that, 90-some% of scientists said so therefore it's correct. Well, that's, in logical fallacy land, that's called an appeal to authority. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't add to the equation. It's like, 2 + 2 plus some fantastical god says that it equals 7. Well, the fantastical god doesn't mean anything. It's just something thrown in, right? The substance all has to be there in order for something to be logically sequential. And rhetoric, of course, is when we put it all together and we create a persuasive presentation. Because here's the thing. Not just grammar and logic is going to get us there. Now, an advisable book, Mortimer Adler, How to Speak, How to Listen. He makes the point in here that if we're speaking just to ourselves, we may not need rhetoric. A lot of times we do, but say, for example, if I leave a note at the door when I'm going out that I have to bring a pen to the meeting, or I could leave a note that says, bring this pen. I don't have to use a lot of rhetorical devices in there. I can just use grammar in a sentence, and I can use some logic. You're going there, so therefore you need this. That's it, right? But whenever we're going to talk to somebody else, we're always trying to persuade in a way. Now, it doesn't mean we're trying... No, somebody could say, oh, Steve, well, somebody could just be making a humorous presentation. Well, still, surely they would hope to persuade you that it's humorous, right? Because if somebody gives a humorous presentation, which is purely just entertaining, they're not trying to get you to buy anything or whatever. They surely have the hope that you would think it's funny. Like they're trying to persuade you that it's funny, or they're trying to persuade you that it's entertaining by the effort they put in and so on, and whatever devices that they're using within that presentation. So once again, going way back, approximately 2,500 years ago, whatever, I believe it was the Greeks, he used to talk about within rhetoric, there are another three components. So there's three main components, right, to begin with. In the Trivium, there's grammar, logic, and rhetoric. But then within rhetoric, there's ethos, pathos, and logos. Logos shows up again as logic, right? So ethos is credibility. It means whoever you're standing up there, you're not a complete unknown, or the introducer. That what very often happens is the introducer will establish that credibility. For example, I was recently asked to speak at a big convention. What do I have as a qualification for that? Well, I happened to walk last year, solo backpacking trip, 8,000 kilometers, unofficial world record for how I did it. And so I'm asked to speak on the power of on focus, because somebody, I guess, thought that I must have had a lot of focus to be able to do that, upwards of 75 kilometers on foot per day through northern climates and so on. In his mind, I have some credibility. In the case of this guy, Patrick Henry, he was, in giving this speech, he was a member of the House of Burgesses. He was a prominent lawyer, and he was given the floor, right? It was his turn to speak. So he had the credibility, he had the standing, you might say, in a legal term. He had standing to make this presentation, so therefore he had credibility. So that has to be established. You think of a lot of the great orators, by the time when they become known as great orators, they have credibility within their circles. Think of a guy like Barack Obama among the people who liked him. He had credibility. Think of the guy like Donald Trump among people who like him. He has credibility. So when he stands up and says something, they listen. Right? That's credibility. The next one is pathos. That has to do with like the pathology, right? The emotion. You want to appeal to emotion, because human beings, fundamentally, we are more emotional than we are logical. So that's probably why it comes ahead of logic within rhetoric. So in establishing our rhetoric, building it out of grammar and logic, we have to build this rhetoric based on our credit. We have to build up our credibility somehow. We have to build up the emotion somehow, connect with the emotion. And think about this speech that Patrick Henry is given. This is just a part of it, right? He's appealing to the manhood within those guys standing around him and their fundamental commitment to liberty. So he asks rhetorical questions. He doesn't expect an answer, right? Why? So he says that our brethren, these are our brothers, this is the neighboring colony, they are already in the field. They're fighting the British. Why stand we here idle? So this isn't a question that he's expecting an answer for. It's a question that he's asking to pull out of the men listening their sense of manliness, to man up and go out and do something about it. What is it that gentlemen wish? What would they have? He's asking these questions not because he wants answers, but because he's getting them to answer those questions within them. So that he's going to come to this crescendo at the end. That, for me, it's liberty or death. And he's thinking that for many people it's the same way. And this was a successful speech because he got the commitment of Virginian troops to the cause, which may have tilted the scale towards independence. Very profound speech, very famous speech. So the appeal to emotion. We see that anybody who's watched Donald Trump's speech recently, he did this masterfully, even though he's not a great orator in many ways, but in terms of his appeal to pathos, to emotions. I think the most powerful one was where he appealed to heroism within various people that were planted in the audience. One of which I remember was this woman, I forget what her name was. She was a petty officer in the Coast Guard, I think, and she was involved with this helicopter rescue of some 40 people. And that's a very heroic thing to do. And everybody looking at it, even the never-Trumpers, guys like, what's his name, Paul Ryan, in behind with a smirk on his face, all of a sudden it started changing, he started to smile, and he started to nod, and so on. You see the power of emotion to get through into the heart, bypass the head, right to the heart, right? That's important. And then also there has to be logic in there too. There has to be eventually what it is that we want people to understand in terms of the empirical truth of things going on. Like, what is the situation that we're talking about? I'm talking to you about grammar, logic, and rhetoric and the importance of it. So my hope is that not only would I use a bit of drama and waving my hands around and putting out questions and reading a dramatic thing at the beginning to sort of stir up a little bit of interest, which is what rhetoric is intended to do. But at the end, there has to be some, if it's really rhetoric, there has to be some logic involved versus sophistry. Sophistry would be pseudo-logic brought in, or some sort of deception or even lies, but all veiled in a similar process. But it's not considered to be rhetoric because it's not necessarily truthful. So if you're going for logic, if it's logically consistent, then it has to be truthful, or at least as truthful as the person saying it can come to, right? It could be logical fallacies in there, unknown, but nevertheless the attempt is at logic, right? So it's very important, I think, to have these sort of this structure to have the knowledge of it and the practice of it probably, because otherwise we don't really understand what's being done to us. It was a hard time to figure out. We have a hard time figuring out, sophistry or falsehoods from true logic, and also we have a harder time convincing people of things, right? Because so often we want people to be involved with us in some way. It's how we get things done in the world, and it's how we have relationships, it's how we get dates, it's how we sell things, and so on. But we have to be honest as well, and that's where rhetoric comes in. If we're sticking with logic, we have our credibility, our ethos. We have our pathos. We're appealing to emotion, so we get people interested. But we end up being logical, being truthful at the end. So that's. I just wanted to wrap up with another great oratory and rhetorical, I would say, quote from somebody else, a guy named Henry Hardwick, who wrote a book about oratory. It goes something like this: oratory is the parent of liberty. By the constitution of things, it was ordained that eloquence should be the last stay and support of liberty, and that with her she is ever destined to live, to flourish, and to die. It is to the interest of tyrants to cripple and debilitate every species of eloquence. They have no other safety. It is then the duty of free states, in brackets I would say free men, to foster oratory. Steve here again. Great chatting. Talk again soon. Bye for now.